What's up, skaters? My name is Carly, or Roller Ghoulie, and today I'm going to be showing you how to dye your roller skates. I've done this a few times now, so I kind of got the hang of doing it, but it is definitely a frequently asked topic and tutorial, so I decided to do another one because it just so happened my friend wants to dye her skates black. So these are my friend's skates. Today we're going to be dyeing them black. I have all the things that I need. We'll go over the ingredients that you need to do this, as well as just some tips and tricks. Before we get into it, I want to just go over a couple rules of thumb. So you can't necessarily dye skates a lighter color. I have heard of people doing some bleaching techniques. I've never done it myself, so I can't really give any advice on that. I can't say that it's going to be successful if you try to do it, but if you do, let us know how it went. So with that being said, I get a lot of questions about dyeing skates. For example, if you have these skates, since they're such a dark blue and they're really rich in color, you're not going to be able to dye them a light pink or a light green or any light color at all. So I do get asked a lot about dyeing darker colors lighter, and as far as I know, to my knowledge, it cannot be done. So please keep that in mind when you kind of decide on what color you want to dye your skates, if you do decide to do it. Usually a good rule of thumb is that you want to stay within the same color family or go with something much darker. So since these are blue, I wouldn't recommend dyeing them pink or orange, anything like that, because with the color wheel, if you try to dye or put certain colors on top of others, it usually will turn muddied if they're not within the same family. So you could probably have success dyeing these purple or black, maybe a really dark green or a teal, but definitely something that would be darker that would cover this blue really nicely. If you have a lighter skate like floss or strawberry, you'll have kind of more options to play around with because those shades are so light. But otherwise, you definitely want to stay away from trying to completely change the color to, you know, the opposite side of the spectrum, or trying to get them lighter. Another thing to note is that this change is permanent. If I dye these skates black, they are going to be black. You cannot rinse this out. If you want to change the color again, it's possible, but definitely not from black. So let's say we had strawberry skates that we dyed blue. You could probably dye those again to be black or purple, but you won't be able to remove the color that you've put onto the skates. Also, this tutorial is specific for dyeing suede skates. If you have a different material of roller skates, this is not the tutorial for you. There are leather dyes out there or leather paint that you could use if you have leather skates. And I believe that there are paint for vinyl skates as well, but this is specific for suede. The material I'm using is a suede dye, so it soaks into the suede material, so please be sure that your skates are made of suede if you're going to follow this tutorial. Now that we got all of that fun stuff out of the way, let's talk about what you're going to need. Obviously, you're going to need your roller skates. I use a brand called Angelus Direct for my suede dye. I haven't used any other brands, so I can't vouch for them. I'm sure there are plenty out there, but this is the one that I stand by and that I have used many times. They have their own website you can get many different colors from. I recommend doing a few test swatches first to be sure that the color is going to come out the way that you want it to, because it will react differently with different base colors. I like to have a cup of water handy in case I need to wipe any of the dye off if it gets onto the plastic sole or on the eyelets. And I also like to have some paper towels with me for cleanup and for wiping off those extra bits. So once you have your dye, the Angelus Direct ones come with a really nice tool for putting the dye on. So this is usually what I use. It's almost like a little fuzzy ball on a metal stick. So it will come with this, and it will come with your dye. Depending on how big your skates are, how much of the skates you want to dye, you may need a couple of these. It's always safe to have a little extra than not enough. But since I know I'm just doing her skates and I'm leaving the backstay alone and she has pretty small feet, I'm probably going to get away with just using one today. Even though it comes with a nice tool, I like to have a little paintbrush for getting into specific areas. So for example, on her skates, she wants to keep the backstay, which is this strip, blue. So to have better control over where the dye goes, I'm going to be using the brush in that area so that I can make sure no dye gets onto the backstay. All right, so now that you know what you need, let's get right into it. The first step is remove the laces. You don't want the laces to be on there because they'll be in the way and you don't want to stain them. So we're just gonna get those off. I got the laces off, so I'm gonna start beginning the dye process. If your skates are particularly dirty, you want to clean them first because it will help the dye transfer a lot better. You can buy a Suede cleaning kit from Angelus Direct, and it comes with everything you need to clean up your Suede skates. It's fairly simple, you just follow the instructions that come with it, and you should be good to go. So I like to start with the side because it's the easiest part to start with. So you kind of get the hang of how the dye transfers on and the way that you're going to want to do your strokes. So I'm going to shake up this real nice. And if you're worried about dirtying up your surface and getting any stains, I recommend putting something down like newspaper or a towel that you don't care about. This is just a glass table, so I'm safe. Okay, you're going to take your applicator now and you're going to dip it in. Oh, whoops. I got dye all over the table, so that's what I mean. You're gonna dip it into the bottle and just kind of tap out any excess so it's not dripping. And you're gonna make your first few strokes. So you'll notice as you put it on that since it is a liquid, it kind of expands onto the suede. So that's why it's nice to start with an area that is easy to avoid mistakes so that you can kind of get a hang of how it transfers and how much dye you need on your applicator so that when you go back in for more, you know how much you kind of want on here. So I did my first few strokes and you can see how much it covered with just one dip. There are some skates or some colors that you might have to go over the whole process twice. It looks like her skates are taking this color really well though, so I don't predict that's gonna happen. But if you feel like even when your applicator is pretty full of dye and it's still not really covering the full color, you might have to go over it a second time. I'm just gonna keep on going. I try to make most of my strokes in the same direction, just in case there are any visible stroke marks. At least they will be going in the same direction. You usually won't see stroke marks, but I guess it's just the artist in me that has a habit of doing that. So I'm getting pretty close to the plastic sole now. So I'm not going all the way up to it just yet, and I'll explain why in a moment. Okay. I'm just gonna set that on a piece of paper towel for a second. Move these over here. By the way, you might have seen this guy in a past video. His name is Rasputin, and he just hangs out here. This is his favorite room, so that's why he's in some of these videos. Okay, so you see I'm pretty close to the plastic sole now. Your skates might have a wood sole or cork, and you can get dye on this and wipe it off quickly while it's still wet. But I like to use a brush though because you can really get in there on those tight spots and not get as much on the stuff that you're trying to avoid. And it's just easier because the boot kind of folds in a little bit around this area, so it's easier when you have a smaller brush to get into those areas than with the larger applicator. So I'm gonna dip my brush in. I'm just gonna carefully go along that edge. I also wanted to add that you can definitely do this process with the same color. So sometimes your skates can fade a little bit in color just from wear over time, or if you leave your skates in the car and they're baking in the sun. things like that can make the color wear down a little bit. So I've definitely seen people dye their skates the same color that they originally were. So if she just wanted a boost in color, we could have definitely re-dyed these a blue and just kind of brought them back to life a little bit. So you don't necessarily have to do this just to change the color, but you can also amp up the color that they already are. Okay, so I just got the tiniest bit on an area I didn't want it to go. So I'm going to just dip my paper towel in a little bit of water, and I'm just gonna rub that off. Pretty easy. It comes off easier the sooner you do it. If you let it sit for a little bit, it might be difficult to get off. So I went all the way down now, and I'm gonna do the same process up along the backstay since we're trying to keep that blue. I'm gonna use the brush again to go along the backstay so I can be a little bit more accurate with where I'm putting the dye. I'm also going to use the brush to go along the top so that I don't stain the lining. And that's this area up here is the lining. I don't want to dye that, so I'm going to use the brush to go along the edge. Okay. Going back to my applicator now to get some of the bigger areas. And this applicator really does work nicely because it holds a good amount of dye, so you don't have to re-dip too many times, which just makes things a little easier. If you see any areas that there's a little bit of the color showing through, you can just go back over them. But I think this is looking pretty good so far. So this is where we're at. Now we have this area along the eyelets to do. With the eyelets, since they are metal, the dye will come off of them pretty easily, so I try not to worry too much about getting dye in them because it's something that can easily be removed. If you're someone who just doesn't want to deal with having to wipe them, each one of them down, you can certainly use the brush and go over these areas and avoid all of that. But today I'm just going to go right over everything and then wipe them down afterwards. If there's any color showing around the eyelet, because sometimes the suede can kind of push down around that eyelet, you can certainly go in with the brush, or you can just kind of push down and let the dye absorb into those areas. Alright, now before I move on, I'm going to go with my paper towel and just wipe those off a bit. And it should come off pretty nicely. Alright, so around these bigger eyelets, I'm actually going to go in with the brush because it's a little bit easier. Just to get in and around underneath them. Again, not worrying too much about getting dye on the eyelets because I'm just going to wipe that off when I'm done. Now if you waited a little bit too long to wipe down the eyelets and you're having some staining, you can probably remove that with some acetone. But this should wear off over time if there are any residue left over. So now this whole side is finished. Pretty easy, pretty quick. I'm gonna repeat everything that I just did on the other side now. Say hi, Rasputin. He had a rough night. Okay, I finished the other side. Everything's looking pretty good. And now we have the tongue to do. This is usually the trickiest part because the tongue kind of goes underneath this area and it's really hard to get to sometimes. And you also have the color on the inside as well. So depending on what you're going for, some people will leave the tongue the original color because they like having the multiple colors on their skates. I think this looks pretty cute right now, but that's not what we're going for today. So we are going to dye the tongue. You can also decide if you want to leave the original color on the inside of the tongue. Usually you can't see this part of the tongue when you have your skates on, but that's personal preference if you don't want any of the original color showing whatsoever. So I like to pull the tongue out as far as it will go, and I'll take the brush, and you just really want to try to fold it back as much as possible and really get the brush in there. And I'll do the same on the other side. And usually suede is pretty durable, so kind of pulling the tongue around isn't going to harm it much. So you're going to want to pull back as much as you can so you can see all of the color that's exposed and really get in there with your brush. Same thing on the other side. Okay, and that's usually the hardest part. So once you have that done, it's pretty smooth sailing. On the rest of the tongue, I'm going to use the applicator because it's a pretty large area to cover. And the brush would just take a bit longer. So just like you did before, you're gonna go over it with your strokes. Okay. So the tongue is fully covered now. I'm gonna let it stay out like this so it can dry a little bit easier. And I'm not gonna be doing the back area of it, but if you decide to, you're just gonna do the same process all along these edges. You can use a brush if you wanna avoid this foam insert here, but if you don't care about it, you can go right over that as well. Some other things I'd like to mention is this can possibly dye or stain your socks. Some of the hide colors already dye socks, so you might be used to that, but if you're not, sometimes this dye can transfer onto lighter materials like white socks. If you wear white skate socks with your skates and you do decide to dye this inside area, it may stain those socks, so just keep that in mind if you do decide to do the inside of the tongue. The last step I did off camera was I let these dry for an hour or so, and then I looked over them really good in the light to make sure that there wasn't any blue showing. So any areas that had a little bit of blue peeking through, I just went over that quickly with the black again. And this is the finished product. We have the blue backstay still because that's what she wanted. So now all that's left to do is put the laces back on and they're good to go. You can certainly use a sealant spray or a weather protectant spray on these, specific for suede, because that will help lock in the color a little bit. So normally I'll use a suede sealer from Angelus Direct, and I'll do a couple spray coats of that on freshly dyed skates. If you do decide to do a sealant spray, you would most likely just follow the instructions on the can. I would just spray from a couple feet away and do a nice even coat over the skates, let them dry, and repeat that one more time. But there are many different brands out there and variations of sealants for suede, so you can certainly test a few out. I've only worked with the Angelus Direct one, so that one seems to work pretty good for me. You can check that one out if you'd like. I'm pretty happy with how these turned out. I felt like the blue took the black dye pretty well. So I think that these are all good to go. I'm just gonna lace them up and hand them off to my friend. I hope this tutorial helped you if it's something that you're looking into doing. All of the Moxi colors are beautiful and amazing just the way they are, but I understand that sometimes when you've had skates for a long time and you don't want to invest in a brand new pair, just changing up the color can be a world of difference for you. So whether it's just you're looking for a color change, you want to amp up the original color that you have, this is a great way to go that's very affordable. I think this cost like $3.80, and you can see I didn't use the whole bottle on her skates, and she does wear a size, what size are this? She wears a size 5, so she has fairly small skates, and with this size of skate, with the material, it didn't even use up a whole bottle, and that's really all that you need. If you want to get a sealant, I think that's like $8, so this is a pretty cheap way to change up your skates without having to invest in a brand new pair. Or if you just want to bring some life back into your old pair, this is also an excellent way to do that. We'd love to hear any other tutorial ideas you might have for us. We love making these videos, so if you have anything, drop it in the comments. And thank you so much for watching.